Hi, my name is Russell Mullenberg, and this is Eat This Word, a weekly program where I serve up bite-sized bits of Bible. The passage we're started looking at last week, is 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10. Wonderful passage, wonderful description of what it means to be a part of the people of God. It really ties the church to the Old Testament, the promises of God to the people of Israel. So let's read it. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And so this passage captures me and my imagination because of these titles, 6 different titles that are given to the people of God. Last week we talked about verse 9 here, the chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's treasured possession. We saw how that ties to the Constitutional Convention of Israel in Exodus 19 and God's covenant after bringing them out of Egypt. And now this week I want to look at the 2 phrases in verse 10. Now you're the people of God. Now you have received mercy. And again, I want to take you to the Old Testament and kind of give you the background for these 2 phrases. And so to do that, we need to go to the story of Hosea. Hosea is a prophet in the Old Testament, a prophet to the northern kingdom of Israel. And his ministry, what God called him to do, is really rather interesting. So here's a description, verses 2 and 3 of the first chapter of Hosea. Really, these 2 verses sum up Hosea's whole career, his whole calling, really his whole life in these 2 verses. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." And so he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So here's Hosea's life. Here's God's instruction to Hosea. He's to marry a woman named Gomer, unfortunate name. We kind of chuckle about it because there's an old black and white sitcom that had a character named Gomer who wasn't real smart. The reason we don't name our girls Gomer, and the reason that's not a biblical name for young women, is probably because of what happens here in this story. Hosea is instructed to marry Gomer, and he's told right up front, she's not going to be faithful to you. And we're not sure if Gomer already had a reputation when Hosea married her. Some people think maybe she was actually actively working as a prostitute at the time. We're not sure about that, but we do know, and God lets Hosea know, when you're married to her, she's not going to remain faithful. She's going to commit adultery, and even as it goes along and as their marriage progresses, there are hints that eventually she just walks away entirely from the marriage. She leaves him. She ends up cohabitating with another man, even selling herself into prostitution, because we're told later Gomer goes back and he has to pay a ransom just to get her back and bring her out of that house of prostitution. And so that's what God instructs his prophet Hosea to do. And Hosea's ministry, it's not a secret. People know, people in the community where he lives recognize what's happening. I think Hosea even talks about it in the chapters after this, where we get hints at Hosea's message. He makes reference to his marriage. It's his marriage, and we're told why here. God tells him why, because his marriage becomes a parable of the relationship God has with the people of Israel. God says, Hosea, I want you to experience what it's like to be cheated on by your wife, because I feel like I God, am being cheated on by the people of Israel. And so Hosea lives this very public soap opera. And it becomes an object lesson to the people of how God views their relationship with him. And it extends even to the point of Gomer having children, and the names that those children are given. And so we're told here in verse 3 that she conceived and bore a son. We're not sure if that's Hosea's son or product of adultery. And the first child is named after a battlefield, an infamous battlefield. And God says there's a warning that a day of destruction is coming for Israel. But then she has a second child, a daughter. And we see this in verse 6. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Imagine that, a little baby girl whose name is not loved, or not shown mercy, or no compassion. Lo Ruhamah. And again, her name is a prophetic witness against the people of Israel that they are not going to be loved any longer, that they are not going to be forgiven. And then Gomer has a third child, another son. And after she'd weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son, and then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. For you are not my people, and I'm not your God. Here, this little baby boy, and his name is a prophetic witness against the people of Israel, that these people who were God's treasured possession, the ones flown on eagle's wings out of Egypt, that now God looks at them and says, you're not my people. Not my people anymore because of what you've done. And so that's Hosea's life. That's Hosea's relationship with Gomer. His family becomes this prophetic testimony about what's happening in Israel. It's dark, and it's a tough assignment, no doubt, for Hosea. But before chapter 1 ends, and throughout the book of Hosea, there are sprinkled little messages of hope. And even chapter 1, this very dark chapter, verse 10, it ends with a pointer towards something better. God says, yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called children of the living God. And so even as this opening chapter of Hosea's book ends with this warning that the people are not going to be shown mercy and they're not going to be loved anymore, there's this little glimmer of hope that a day is coming when they will be recognized as his people again. I'll take it back to our passage in 1 Peter chapter 2. And you can see why we're talking about this story. In verse 10 here, once you were not a people, Lo Ami, not my people. But now, because you're in Jesus, now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, Lo Ruhamah, not loved, no compassion, no forgiveness. But now you have received mercy. Now that you're found in Jesus, now you are once again loved. And so, as Peter looks at the people who have put their faith and trust in Jesus, and he sees this new community that's been created, this is what he sees. He sees the fulfillment of the promises given way back when in Moses, that they would be a treasured people, that they'd be a holy priesthood and a holy nation. And he sees the resolution of the tension of Hosea, that these people who had not been loved will be loved again. These people who were rejected as God's people will now be seen as God's people again. And that is those who find themselves in Jesus. And again, if that's you, if that's me, then we are now part of that chosen people of God. And so next week, we'll come back one more time to this passage. We'll look at the purpose for all this, that you may declare the praises of him, the one who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light.